The old man stood quietly at the edge of the military cemetery. His coat was worn but clean. His hands, aged, calloused, clutched a small bouquet of wilted flowers. No one had invited him. No one had expected him. But there he was. Quantico National Cemetery was packed that morning. It wasn't just any funeral. This was the final farewell for General Marcassar Connors, a legend in uniform, a four-star general whose decisions had shaped modern military strategy, and whose name had earned a place in textbooks. Dignitaries had gathered. The media had gathered. Soldiers in rows, press crews with cameras, state flags, a 21-gun salute waiting in queue. Every detail had been rehearsed. But no one recognized the old man at the gate. He didn't approach the front rows. He didn't try to squeeze in among the polished shoes and iron-dress blues. He simply stood there, like a statue made of time and memory. He wasn't just any man. His name was Franklin Hayes, once a sergeant in a war long past, Vietnam, 1968. And in the inside pocket of his coat, folded next to his heart, was an envelope. A letter written by General Connors himself. And he had come not for attention. Not for applause. Just to return the man home. As people filed into the ceremonial area, young officers distributed programs, nodded to the high command, and made sure the family was comfortable. In all the movement, a young lieutenant finally noticed Franklin. He walked up with the kind of confidence only youth could carry and said, "Excuse me, sir. Are you with the family?" Franklin didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed fixed on the casket up front, draped in the American flag. "No," he said finally. "Are you with press? Military escort?" Franklin shook his head slowly. "3rd Recon. Charlie Company. Vietnam. Khe Sanh." The lieutenant blinked. That meant nothing to him. It was just history. Faded pages. "I'm sorry, sir. This area is for—" Franklin raised one hand gently. Not angrily. Just firmly. "I know," he said. The young officer hesitated. Then turned and walked away. But someone else had seen. Someone who did know. General Andrew L. Price, the current top general in the United States Army, had caught the whole interaction from the stage. And suddenly, everything changed. The music stopped. The chatter slowed. And from behind the tent, a new sound grew, a low rumble. Engines. Black SUVs, marked with official seals and fluttering escort flags, rolled slowly onto the grass. In the middle, a long ceremonial limousine, shining like obsidian, came to a halt. People stood. The driver stepped out. Then, with a smooth practice motion, the rear door opened. And General Price emerged, not in a standard dress uniform, but full ceremonial attire, dark navy jacket, gold braids, white gloves, sword at his hip. No sunglasses. No smile. Just purpose. Cameras clicked into position. Reporters whispered. Security stiffened. But General Price didn't walk toward the podium. He didn't greet the family. He didn't face the flag. Instead, he turned. He walked across the field, leaving the entire military formation behind, and headed straight toward the old man at the gate. People watched in silence. "Who is that? What's going on? Why is the general leaving the stage?" But the questions died as they saw what came next. General Price reached Franklin Hayes and stopped. Then, without a word, he removed his gloves and gave a full salute. To him. To the man no one had noticed. To the man who had once pulled a wounded young lieutenant out of the jungle mud under enemy fire 57 years ago. That lieutenant was now the highest-ranking officer in the country. And the man who had saved him was nearly forgotten. Until now. Franklin didn't move. He didn't return the salute immediately. His hands were still holding the flowers. Still holding the past. Then General Price spoke, quietly, but clear enough for those nearby to hear. "I told Marcus I'd find you again," he said. Franklin's jaw clenched just slightly. General Price gestured toward the vehicles behind them. He wanted to be here. But only you could bring him home. An aide stepped forward, holding a polished wooden urn. The remains of General Marcus R. Connors. And in full view of the press, the Secretary of Defense, and half of the Pentagon. General Price placed the urn into Franklin Hayes' hands. Cameras tried to flash, but Price turned and raised a single hand. "No photos," he said. Silence fell again. Then Price took the stage, the one meant for the eulogy, and looked out across the field. He didn't open a speech. He didn't unroll a scroll. He just spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice low but steady, "there are moments in a soldier's life that define us, not by medals or commands, but by debts we never forget." He turned slightly and motioned to Franklin, who now stood behind him holding the urn. "If not for this man, Marcus Connors would have died before he was 20. I wouldn't be standing here today. And none of the work we've done in the last 50 years would exist." The crowd was silent. Even the press had lowered their cameras. Franklin kept his eyes down. But General Price, his voice trembled now. "If there's anyone who deserves to lead this final walk, it's Sergeant Franklin Hayes." And then it happened. First, a single hand clap. Then another. Until the entire crowd, soldiers, officers, family, strangers, rose to their feet and began to salute. They weren't saluting a title. They weren't saluting a uniform. They were saluting a man. A man who had quietly carried the weight of war for half a century. A man who had never asked for honor, but had finally received it. Franklin didn't cry. He didn't bow. He simply began to walk. General Price beside him. Shoulder to shoulder. Down the aisle. Toward the flag. Toward the brother he had once carried through hell. The walk wasn't long. But to those who watched it unfold, it felt like history itself was moving across the grass. General Price on one side. Franklin Hayes on the other. Between them, the urn of Marcus Connors, brother in arms, commander, friend. As they reached the front, the honor guard parted without a word. Not because it was planned, but because it was right. Franklin stepped up to the pedestal. The casket had already been draped and positioned, but this was different. He knelt, not fast, not dramatic. Just with the slow, careful motion of a man whose knees no longer cooperated. Then, he placed the urn gently onto the platform, just above the folded flag. It was not military protocol. But no one stopped him. Because at that moment, there wasn't a soldier on the field who thought it should be any other way. General Price stood still, watching with the quiet reverence of a man who had seen both battlefields and boardrooms, but never anything quite like this. Then the bugler began to play. The notes of taps cut through the air, soft, slow, mournful. No applause followed. No anthem rose. Just the sound of silence. The kind of silence that weighs more than any speech. Franklin stood motionless. His hand rested on the urn. Not trembling. Just present. The funeral concluded with military precision. Salutes returned. Flags folded. Officers dismissed. And slowly, the crowd began to drift. But Franklin didn't move. Long after the last guest had left, after the last camera crew packed up, after folding chairs were stacked and the family escorted away, he remained. Beneath the tall oak trees, beside the grave now freshly sealed and marked with a simple headstone. General Marcus R. Connors. Brother. Commander. Friend. No ranks. No medals. Just words that meant something. Franklin knelt once more, slower this time. The stiffness in his knees a quiet reminder that time does not wait. He reached into his coat. Not for a speech. Not for a medal. But for something far simpler, a small stick of incense, wrapped in old paper. It was something he had carried through jungles, through recovery, through decades. He lit it with a small lighter, his hands shielding the flame from the wind. The smoke curled into the cool air, soft and slow. Then he spoke. Not loudly. Not for the world to hear. but just loud enough that if someone stood close enough, they might have heard the words carried on the breeze. "I told you I'd make it." A pause. "You always did hate flowers." A long breath. Then, finally, "Rest easy, kid." He bowed his head. And when he stood again, he wasn't alone. General Price had returned. Still in full dress uniform, though the weight of the day now showed in his shoulders. He walked quietly, slowly, and stopped behind Franklin. In his hand he held a small yellowed envelope, aged, weathered, handwritten. Franklin looked at it with suspicion. "What's this?" Price spoke softly. "It was in Connor's safe. He left instructions. Only give this to Franklin if he makes it all the way to the grave." Franklin took it. The paper crackled as he opened it, careful not to tear the fragile fold. Inside was a single paragraph, written in Connor's unmistakable hand. Shaky, yes. But every word felt heavy, chosen. "Frank, you never let me thank you." "Not really. You saved my life and disappeared like it didn't matter. But it mattered to me. You're the only debt I carried that no medal, no command, no ceremony could repay. You let me live long enough to serve. Long enough to lead. Long enough to die at peace. And if there's any justice in this world, one day they'll say my name beside yours. And maybe then I'll finally feel worthy. Your friend. Me." Franklin stared at the words for a long time. Then folded the letter. Slid it back into the envelope. And tucked it into the same pocket where the first letter had lived all those years. "I didn't do it for thanks," he said. His voice was quiet. Steady. Without bitterness. General Price gave a slow nod. "I know," he said. "That's why you deserve it." 1 year later. The crowd gathered again, this time not at a cemetery, but outside a new building. A stone arch stood proudly over the entryway, its bronze lettering gleaming in the sunlight. The Franklin Hayes Center. A home for healing. Veterans lined the pathway. Some in uniform. Others in wheelchairs, civilian coats, or VSU jackets. All of them watching. Under the arch, ribbon in place, cameras on standby. Inside, a sanctuary built from legacy. PTSD counseling rooms. Physical therapy halls. A woodworking shop. A memorial garden with names never printed in textbooks. It was not just a building. It was a place for the ones who never got statues. A place for the ones still fighting wars in their sleep. All funded by the Marcus Connors Legacy Foundation. And approved personally by General Andrew Price. But there was one last thing the crowd waited for, a speech. A word from the man whose name was carved above the door. But Franklin Hayes wasn't on stage. He stood off to the side. Wearing a dark coat, hands behind his back. In one hand, a single white lily. Its petals curled. Color fading. But he held it like it mattered. Because it did. No cameras turned his way. No one shoved a mic into his face. Only a few nodded in quiet recognition. He didn't wave. Didn't bow. Didn't speak. He just watched. Watched the center open. Watched young veterans step inside for the first time. Watched something rise out of quiet service, not fame. And for once, that was enough. General Price approached after a while. Franklin saw him coming and gave a small nod. They stood side by side again, like they had at the casket, like they had at the gate. Looking at a place that wasn't just built for them. It was built because of them. "I told you," Franklin muttered. "I didn't want a building." Price smirked. "It's not a building." Franklin raised an eyebrow. "It's a thank you," Price said. "Etched in stone. For every man who gave more than he got." Franklin looked down at the lily. Then back at the doors. "You think they'll come?" he asked. Price followed his gaze. "They already have." The sun dipped behind the trees as Franklin turned to leave. He walked alone, quietly. The way he always had. But something had changed. Not in him. In the world around him. Weeks turned into months. The Franklin Hayes Center became more than just a place with polished floors and careful landscaping. It became a haven for the forgotten, the broken, and the ones still carrying invisible wounds. There were no press releases every time someone walked through those doors. No photographers when a veteran found peace for the first time in years. No headlines when a father finally held his child again without fear in his eyes. But quietly, behind the scenes, something remarkable was happening. And at the heart of it all? An old man. Still wearing the same worn coat. Still walking with the same quiet step. Franklin never moved in. He never took an office. Never sat behind a desk. But he came often. Sometimes he just walked the garden. Other times he sat in the back of group therapy, never speaking, just listening. Veterans half his age would sit near him, not sure why, but drawn to the stillness he carried. He didn't offer advice. But when he nodded, you felt it. And in the silence, people healed. Not quickly. Not dramatically. But deeply. Because finally, they were in a place where pain wasn't judged, just understood. One afternoon, a young Marine sat beside him on a bench in the memorial garden. He'd lost 2 brothers to suicide in the same year. He hadn't spoken in his last 3 sessions. But next to Franklin? He spoke. "They don't get it," he said. "They all keep asking me what's wrong. But I don't even know what to say anymore." Franklin didn't respond right away. Then, he looked out over the garden. "You don't have to explain the war to people who've been there," he said softly. The Marine wiped his eyes. "Why do you come here? You could have disappeared like the others." Franklin looked down at the folded envelope still tucked in his coat. Then at the lily he always brought, every single visit. "Because someone remembered me when it mattered," he said. "Now it's my turn to remember someone else." Word began to spread, not through headlines, but through stories. Whispers among veterans. "You see that old guy with the lily? That's Hayes. Yeah, the one who walked the urn down the field. That was him. He doesn't say much. But if he sits next to you, you're gonna be okay." And gradually, Franklin became something more than a man. He became a symbol. Not of glory. Not of war. But of quiet honor. He never asked for recognition. So the world gave him something far better. Respect. One day, as spring turned to summer, a ceremony was held at the center's garden. A few hundred people came, veterans, families, even schoolchildren. General Price stood at the podium once again. But this time, his speech was short. "Today we remember those who never wore medals, who never stood on stages, who never asked for applause." He turned toward the crowd. "People like Franklin Hayes." Franklin was seated in the front row. A little older now. A little slower. But still holding the same lily. He started to rise, but Price motioned him to stay seated. Then he stepped down from the podium. Walked straight to him. And did something that took everyone by surprise. He saluted. In front of everyone. This time, not as a general. But as a man paying a debt. The entire crowd followed. Veterans of all branches. Civilians who had never held a rifle. Children too young to understand war, but old enough to understand respect. They all stood. No music played. No orders were shouted. Just one long, silent salute. And Franklin? He didn't speak. He just lowered his head and closed his eyes. The last photo ever taken of Franklin Hayes was not staged. He wasn't posing. Wasn't smiling for a camera. He was sitting on the garden bench, same as always. One hand resting on the cane. The other on a letter, edges now soft from being folded and unfolded 100 times. And on the ground beside him, a single white lily. He passed peacefully a few months later. No headline led with his name. No CNN banner broke the news. But inside the Franklin Hayes Center, the flags were lowered to half-staff. Veterans wept openly. Young men and women who had found themselves again within those walls walked quietly past the garden, heads bowed. Some left medals. Others, notes. But many, just left lilies. Because they understood. Some heroes don't wear capes or command armies. They just show up, day after day, until someone else can stand again. 1 year later, a small plaque was added to the stone wall outside the center's entrance. It wasn't big. It wasn't gold. It read, Franklin Hayes, 1946 to 2025. He didn't speak often. But when he did, people listened. He didn't ask for thanks. But the country owed him anyway. He reminded us that silence can heal. And that remembering is its own kind of justice. Below it, a quote from Connor's letter. If there's any justice in this world, they'll say my name beside yours. They did. And they still do. Time moved on. The grass in the memorial garden grew a little taller. The benches weathered under sun and rain. But the Franklin Hayes Center remained, strong, full, alive. New veterans came through its doors every week. Some smiling, others broken, many afraid. And they found what Franklin left behind. A place to breathe. A place to heal. A place where no one asked who you used to be, just who you wanted to become. On the wall inside the counseling wing, just above the entrance, were etched 3 words. I never forgot you. No plaque. No explanation. But every person who saw it understood. Some would stop and touch the wall before entering. Others would whisper the words to themselves like a prayer. Because sometimes, that's all anyone really wants, to know they're not forgotten. One afternoon, a young Army medic who had just completed his 4th deployment sat on the edge of the same garden bench Franklin once used. He was shaking. Hadn't spoken in days. A volunteer nurse came over, knelt beside him, and asked gently, Can I get you anything? He nodded once, slowly. Do you have one of those lilies? The nurse paused. Then smiled. I think we have one left. That small white flower, wilted at the edges, soft in color, was handed to him like it was made of gold. He held it in both hands. Didn't cry. Didn't speak. Just breathed. For the first time in a very, very long while. Across the country, stories of Franklin's legacy began surfacing, not as part of a media campaign, but through the quiet passing of word from veteran to veteran. There's a place that gets it. A center that doesn't treat you like a case file. They remember guys like us. And every time someone asked who started it, there was a pause. Followed by a name. Franklin Hayes. Not general. Not doctor. Not director. Just Franklin. Because his story wasn't built on a rank. It was built on presence. A man who showed up. At the funeral. In the garden. In the silence. And somehow made the country listen. 3 years later, a film was made. Not a blockbuster. No explosions. Just a simple documentary, quietly titled The Man Beside the Urn. It won no Oscars. But it played at VA centers across America. And in one moment that made audiences fall completely silent, the camera zoomed in on General Price, now retired, thinner, slower, but with the same fire in his eyes. He looked directly into the lens and said, They almost blocked him at the gate. Called him just an old man. But I told them, if he doesn't go in, I don't either. Because that man saved my life. And then, he saved this country's soul. He paused. And maybe that's the real legacy. Not the building. Not the speeches. Not even the salute. But the simple act of remembrance. Of one man carrying a flower to a grave. And leaving behind a nation changed forever. Some heroes walk alone. Some never ask for credit. Some carry others when the weight becomes too much to bear. And sometimes, the most powerful act is to simply show up, again and again, until the world finally sees you. Franklin Hayes was never looking for attention. But in the end, the world gave him something better. Respect. So the next time you see someone old and quiet at a military service, don't wonder who they are. Just remember. They might be the reason someone else lived. And that's enough. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to Grateful Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no quiet hero ever gets left behind.